The galactic empire of Zal'Kir has always prided itself on its invincible army. Their cruisers could destroy cities in a single salvo, and their planetary blockades kept even the most desperate rebels terrified. When Supreme Admiral K'ra'Zan received the order to invade the solar system, he took it as routine. A primitive race that has only recently entered space, he grumbled to his officers as he studied the intelligence data. 2 standard cycles, and this system will belong to the Empire. He seemed to be right. The first days of the campaign went smoothly. Advanced scouts reported that there were some meager orbital platforms operating around Mars, but most of them were either abandoned or equipped with only pre-flood nuclear weapons. The Earth didn't even organize diplomatic negotiations. No surrender, no requests for talks. They're not even trying to defend themselves, Lieutenant Vartan laughed as their fleet entered the asteroid belt. The first explosion came a second after he said that. One of the Zal'Kir frigates, the Vengeance Blade, was blown to pieces when a hidden mine embedded in an inconspicuous asteroid struck its power core. The fragments of the frigate showered neighboring vessels, damaging their engines. "What kind of a stupid trap is this?" K'ra'Zan fumed. "Amateurs." He ordered the fleet to change course, bypassing the asteroid belt, but ran into another problem. Dozens of empty stations were emitting active signals, creating the illusion of a dispersed fleet. Even the Zal'Kir sensors could not distinguish between decoys and real ships. "They're forcing us to waste energy on false targets," Officer Vartan said in disgust. "It's pathetic." "Pathetic but effective," K'ra'Zan replied, clenching his fists. "Let it be. We will move slowly. They can't stop us. We'll just crush them." But even moving cautiously, the fleet was losing ships. The decoys lured them into traps where small human frigates launched lightning attacks and immediately disappeared into asteroid space. While the Zal'Kir were trying to turn their bulky cruisers around, the human captains were already fleeing. Aboard his flagship, the Darkness of the Empire, K'ra'Zan was furious. "Enough games," he growled. "Enter direct orbit of Earth. We will destroy them in one powerful salvo." The Imperial fleet was lined up in battle formation when suddenly the star of the solar system, the sun, began to flicker strangely. The officers on the bridge looked at each other, their sensors showing something impossible. The gravitational corridors around the sun began to warp. "Is this some kind of technical malfunction?" asked Vartan, squeezing into his seat. "It's not a malfunction," hissed K'ra'Zan, watching as the space in front of their fleet began to twist and bend like water in a whirlpool. The gravitational pulse created by the human engineers had broken the hyperspace corridor used by the Empire ships. One by one, the Zal'Kir ships began to lose control. Frigates crashed into each other, cruisers turned around under unexpected gravitational pressure, and several ships were thrown into deep space altogether. "They've warped space itself," one of the officers blurted out in a daze. K'ra'Zan stood there petrified, watching as a third of his fleet disappeared into the burning wreckage or was scattered among the stars. "It's impossible," he whispered softly. At that very moment, a message appeared on the tactical screen, broadcast over an open frequency. "To the Zal'Kir Empire fleet," a cold voice said, "you have violated the boundaries of human space. We do not seek war, but if you do not leave this system immediately, we will demonstrate what true horror is." "Who is this?" K'ra'Zan roared. A woman in a dark blue uniform with captain's insignia on her chest appeared on the screen. "Admiral Emily Hart," she said, her smile icy cold. "Welcome to the solar system. I hope you've enjoyed our little show. The only thing I'm offering you now is a chance to survive. Leave our system or we will incinerate you." The transmission cut off. K'ra'Zan gritted his teeth. "They think they've won," his voice trembled with rage. "They haven't even seen our true power yet." But even he felt a depressing feeling deep inside him. These people did not play by the rules, and that was their greatest threat. K'ra'Zan took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. His fleet still had the advantage in numbers, firepower, and experience. The humans simply had a few good tricks. Instead of irritation, however, he was gnawing at his suspicion that this tactic was too well planned. "Gather the fleet into a new formation," he barked. "We're concentrating fire on their orbital stations. If they want to hide behind subterfuge, we'll destroy their strongholds." "Aye, my lord," the officers began to transmit commands. While the Zal'Kir ships were forming up, K'ra'Zan peered intently at the tactical screen. Why aren't they attacking yet? The humans could have taken advantage of the chaos after the gravity anomaly to strike, but they were silent. There was no fleet movement, no missile salvos, no panic signals on open frequencies. "Give me a full picture of their forces," he demanded. "Scan every ship in the sector." "Aye, aye." Lieutenant Vartan stood there for a few seconds. Then his skin turned pale. "What?" barked K'ra'Zan, walking over to the screen. The tactical chart showed only a few human ships scattered throughout the system. "A trap," K'ra'Zan realized. "They want us to think they are weak." A predatory smile curved his lips. "Prepare the landing craft," he ordered. "I want our troops in those bases immediately." A few minutes later, dozens of transport ships left the hangars, heading for Mars and the asteroid belt where the human platforms had been spotted. "They won't have time to evacuate," Vartan laughed hoarsely. "Their bases will be ours in an hour." K'ra'Zan nodded, but his anxiety remained. Something about it all seemed too easy. Near Mars, the landing craft, the Blade of Judgment, entered orbit and descended toward one of the abandoned stations. "Commander, the station shows no signs of life," one of the soldiers reported. "Perfect," replied the captain of the Zal'Kir landers, Torgan. The soldiers moved out of the ship and quickly took up positions on the outer platforms of the station. No sign of resistance, no alarms, no trap. "This is too easy," Torgan muttered. "Alpha team, go inside. Check the command center." The 5 Zal'Kir soldiers quickly slipped into the narrow corridors of the station. It was dark everywhere, with only dim emergency lights illuminating the narrow passageways. The steel door of the command center was wide open. "It's not even locked," one of the soldiers muttered. "Get in and keep your guard up," Torgan ordered over the comm. The group went inside and then the screens lit up. Instead of data, a single message appeared on them. "It's too late to save you." "What the hell?" Then the whole station shook. A blast wave hit the ship's hull, and a human voice, transmitted over an open frequency, thundered in the air. "Welcome to Mars." The blast wave rolled through the station, activating a number of mines. Hundreds of charged fragments flew at the speed of shells, tearing the paratroopers to pieces. On the bridge of the darkness of the Empire, K'ra'Zan watched as dozens of his landing craft burned in outer space. "This can't be right," he burst out. "They knew we were coming this way." "My lord," Vartan's voice was hoarse. "We've received a new signal from Earth. Their fleet has been activated." Numerous markings appeared on the tactical screen as human ships suddenly emerged from the shadows of planets and asteroids. They were moving quickly and confidently, like predators stalking their prey. And for the first time in his career, Supreme Admiral K'ra'Zan felt a cold fear. "This is no accident," he muttered. "They are leading us, and we are already trapped." Sweat broke out on his face as he realized the bitter truth. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hunting. "All ships, prepare to engage," roared K'ra'Zan. "They have been waiting for us." And somewhere on the other side of the system, Admiral Emily Hart watched as the Zal'Kir walked into the very trap she had been planning for nearly 5 years. "Welcome to the solar system," she said with a cold smile. "You have just made the biggest mistake of your life." Admiral Emily Hart stood on the command bridge of the TSS Defiant, watching the tactical screen. The Zal'Kir fleet was regrouping again, defeated, but not yet defeated. "They still think they can win," she muttered under her breath. "What are your orders, Admiral?" asked Captain Michael Grayson, standing next to her. Emily took a slow breath. In her mind, she was running through a plan that had been nearly 5 years in the making, and now it was reaching its final stages. "Wait until they get in deeper," she said. The flagship of the Empire's darkness, High Admiral K'ra'Zan, frowned as he stared at the scattering of human ships on his screen. They were avoiding direct contact by retreating closer to the sun. It seemed like a desperate tactic. "They're trapped now," he pleaded. "The sun is restricting their maneuver. If they go any further, the radiation and gravity storms will destroy their ships." "My lord, perhaps we should reconsider their trajectory," Lieutenant Vartan suggested cautiously. "The humans are acting too confidently." "They're just buying time," K'ra'Zan said. "Chase them down. Crush them once and for all." The Zal'Kir fleet moved forward, ships spreading out to try to surround the human frigates. They didn't notice the sun begin to change. Aboard the TSS Defiant, a tactician reported, "They're closing in on the intersection," he said. Emily Hart smiled coldly. "It's time. Activate the gravity emitters." In the sun's outer orbit, amid the usual stream of asteroids and debris, dozens of small satellites had awakened. For almost 10 years, people have been installing these devices, gravitational manipulation systems hidden in space debris. They carried a unique human trick. Instead of using super powerful weapons, they manipulated the very fabric of space. The satellites worked simultaneously. Gravitational waves, like invisible tides, passed through the entire system. Space began to bend like paper. The hyperspace corridors used by the Zal'Kir fleet for maneuvering closed. "What's happening?" roared K'ra'Zan as his ships began to push each other out of the way on the tactical screen. The giant cruisers collided under the influence of a sudden gravitational shift. One of the flagships, the Vengeance Blade, crashed into the asteroid and exploded in a bright flash. The other frigate spun uncontrollably, slamming into a neighboring ship. "They've calculated our position and created a gravity trap around us," shouted Vartan. "Damn it!" K'ra'Zan ripped the command amulet from his neck and slammed it against the panel. "Retreat now." But it was too late. The human fleet, which had been retreating, had now changed its trajectory. From the shadows of asteroids and planetary bodies, dozens of small frigates jumped out, deftly maneuvering between the chaotically rotating Zal'Kir vessels. "They don't want to destroy us," Vartan realized. "They want to leave us helpless." A new message arrived on the bridge of the darkness of the Empire. The screen came to life, and Admiral Emily Hart appeared before K'ra'Zan again. "I would suggest that you retreat," she said coldly. "Your hyperspace engines are damaged, and your sensors are blocked. There is only one question left. Do you want to die here or surrender?" "Never!" roared K'ra'Zan. "We are warriors of the Zal'Kir Empire. We never surrender." Emily sighed. "Your pride will be your undoing." She signaled to her officers. The human ships fired a wave of ballistic missiles designed specifically to target the damaged systems. The hot metal tore through the hulls of the Zal'Kir cruisers. On the screen, K'ra'Zan saw his fleet dying. The wreckage of the ships spun helplessly in the gravitational vortex. The remnants of his cruisers, dreadnoughts, and frigates were slowly drifting toward the sun, where they were consumed by fiery vortices. "They beat us," Vartan whispered, his voice trembling. K'ra'Zan remained silent. Everything he had longed for, glory, victory, eternal honor in the Empire, was now burning in the bright flames of the sun. "My lord," the lieutenant looked at his commander. "What now?" For the first time in his career, Supreme Admiral K'ra'Zan had no answer. Aboard the TSS Defiant, Emily Hart watched the remnants of the Zal'Kir fleet drift to their perilous end. "Tell their survivors," she told her officers. "Tell them we accept their surrender, and let them know that if they come back, we will be ready." She turned to Captain Grayson, who smiled. "Well done, Admiral." "This is not a maneuver," Emily replied, her gaze cold and hard. "This is a lesson." The Zal'Kir Empire fleet that had survived the gravity trap near the sun gathered around Mars, desperate to regain its strength. The ships looked shabby, burned hulls, sparking systems, and emergency-sealed armor tiers. Supreme Admiral K'ra'Zan stood on the bridge of the flagship, the Empire's darkness, his eyes blazing with rage. "We've lost nearly a third of our fleet," he roared, "and all because of these treacherous primitives." "My lord," Officer Vartan began, approaching him cautiously, "may I suggest that we retreat while we still can?" K'ra'Zan slammed his fist down on the command panel, causing a shower of sparks to rain down. "Retreat is a disgrace. We will show these pathetic apes what it means to fight against the Empire." He turned to his artillery commander. "Aim all your guns at the Martian orbital stations. Burn them to the ground." The Zal'Kir fleet deployed into a strike formation, preparing to destroy any human resistance. Powerful cannons were charging and energy batteries were roaring, preparing to unleash a crushing barrage of fire. Aboard the TSS Phantom, an invisible frigate orbiting Mars, Captain Julian Corbett sat in the dark bridge of his ship, watching every move Zal'Kir made. His ship was part of the latest series of frigates with a cloaking system that suppressed almost all energy signals. "They're preparing to fire," Corbett said quietly, keeping his eyes on the holographic map. "The time has come." "Orders, Captain?" his senior officer asked. Corbett smiled, his eyes gleaming with predatory pleasure. At once, dozens of human frigates and corvettes that had been hiding under the cloak all along activated their systems. They emerged from the shadow of Mars like a pack of wolves, surrounding the Zal'Kir fleet in a tight ring. The first attack came from the Spectre frigate. Its shells, simple kinetic munitions supplemented with explosive charges, hit the reactor of one of the Zal'Kir cruisers. The explosion consumed the ship, and its wreckage wreaked havoc on the fleet. The following minutes turned into a nightmare for the Empire. The human frigates struck point by point, first at the sensors, then at the communication systems, and only then at the engines. The Zal'Kir ships were blind, deaf, and helpless. "They're inside our formation," one of the officers on K'ra'Zan's bridge shouted. "Our shields are not holding." "Counterattack," K'ra'Zan yelled. "Open fire all around." A volley of their cannons tore through space, but only destroyed empty space. The human frigates were moving too fast, and their attacks were too precise. On board the Phantom, Captain Corbett received a message from the TSS Defiant. "It's time to end this game," she said. "Release the Medusa." Corbett smiled. "With pleasure, Admiral." A satellite-like object separated from the Phantom frigate. Clusters of antennas and generators opened on its surface. The next moment, the device activated an electromagnetic pulse wave. The entire Zal'Kir fleet went blind. Power systems went out. Engines stopped running. Sensors failed. More than a dozen of their ships were left drifting in space, helpless and unprotected. "They've got us," whispered Vartan, watching the human ships surround them. Admiral Emily Hart reappeared on the main screen. "Hi, Admiral K'ra'Zan," she said coldly. "Your armada is defeated. Your ships are helpless. Surrender now, or I will order you to open fire and wipe you from the face of the galaxy." K'ra'Zan remained silent for a long time, gazing into her eyes. They were calm, cold, and ruthless. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he muttered. But his voice broke. "Oh, I know," Hart replied. "And I know that now you see the truth. We have many more surprises, so think carefully before you try again." "My lord," Vartan whispered, "what are we going to do?" K'ra'Zan clenched his fists, his claws scratching at the metal rail. Aboard the TSS Defiant, Emily Hart stood at the panoramic window, watching the remnants of the Zal'Kir fleet slowly move away from Mars. "They will be back," Captain Grayson said. "Let them come," she replied quietly. "We will be ready." High Admiral K'ra'Zan sat in his quarters, staring grimly at the projection of the tactical map. His fleet, once the majestic armada of the Zal'Kir Empire, now looked like a bunch of broken boxes barely holding together. 2 dreadnoughts had lost their main control systems. 5 frigates were without shields, and half of the crews were on the verge of panic. Panic was something he had always considered a weakness of other races. And now it was poisoning his own people. "Officer Vartan!" K'ra'Zan barked. "I want a full report on our forces, and what's that noise?" A strange music was coming from somewhere, sharp and rhythmic, like tapping on metal tanks. "It's them again, my lord," Vartan sighed, holding up his communications tablet. "The humans are, sending psychological attacks again." "Turn it on," the Admiral ordered. Vartan pressed a button, and a voice that clearly belonged to a human came through the speakers. "Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down." K'ra'Zan froze. "What the hell is that?" He nearly knocked the tablet out of his officer's hands. "It's one of their cultural things," Vartan muttered, clearly trying not to laugh. 3 days in a row now. K'ra'Zan clenched his fists so that his claws scratched the table. "Turn it off and stop receiving their signals." "We've tried, my lord," Vartan reported grimly, "but they're tapping into our backup channels. Somehow they've even built the music into the gravity stabilization system. I've already got 3 engineers singing along. If one of them ever plays that Never Gonna Give You Up again, I'm going to throw them out into space," K'ra'Zan snarled. Aboard the TSS Defiant. "Are they still listening?" asked Admiral Emily Hart as she sipped her coffee. "Oh yes," chuckled Captain Corbett. "We're already on the 3rd cycle of the broadcast. They say the commander of the USS Vengeance has started banging his head against the wall." "Okay," Hart smiled. "Time to get serious." "Of course, Admiral." Corbett paused. "Can we have another session of that song? Just for the soul?" Emily raised an eyebrow at him. "Are you serious?" "It touches something deep in my soul. I don't know why." "Notify the agents aboard their fleet," she said, ignoring the joke. "Flagship darkness of the Empire." In the command center, K'ra'Zan tried to maintain some semblance of discipline. His crew looked exhausted and tense. "My lord," an officer of the Vartan suddenly exclaimed, "one of our cruisers has opened fire on his own ships." "What?" "The captain says his crew is being attacked by invisible ships." "That's nonsense!" K'ra'Zan punched the console. "Tell him to cease fire." "He's not responding, my lord." K'ra'Zan felt his limbs go cold. This was no mere accident. The humans had deliberately created an atmosphere of fear among his officers. Their tricks were undermining the morale of his fleet from within. "We will not fall for this psychological game," he snarled. "Prepare all ships for a direct assault on Earth. We will wipe them off the face of the galaxy if we have to." But before his officers could execute the order, a familiar figure reappeared on the screen, Admiral Emily Hart. "Hello, K'ra'Zan," she said with a cold smile. "How are you feeling?" "I'll rip your heart out, ape," he roared. Emily sighed and rested her chin on her hand. "Look, my tea is getting cold, and you have half your ships down. Surrender, and you'll save the rest of your fleet." "I'll never surrender." "Okay," Emily laughed. "Then get ready for our next broadcast. This time we've chosen a polka." The connection was cut off, and a few seconds later, a cheerful polka thundered over the Zal'Kir fleet, eerily reminiscent of the sounds of a squad of crazed robots in metal boots. One of Zal'Kir's officers took off his helmet in despair and whispered, "No, not the polka." K'ra'Zan covered his face with his hands. The people were not just winning, they were enjoying it. Supreme Admiral K'ra'Zan stood in the wheelhouse of his flagship, grinding his teeth. His once majestic armada now looked like a collection of scrap metal. The crew was exhausted, the ships were damaged, and their morale was shattered. The humans weren't just beating them, they were crushing their will to pieces. "My lord," Lieutenant Vartan began cautiously, "we have received a signal from the main base. They say they have a reserve army ready and have ordered all forces to gather for a massive hyperspace jump back to our territory." "At last!" K'ra'Zan bared his fangs. "Order all ships to prepare for the jump. We will return to base, regroup, and then," his eyes narrowed, "then we will show these primitives what the wrath of the Empire is all about." "Aye, my lord." The Zal'Kir fleet gathered into a tight formation, and the hyperspace gate generators activated. A blue glow enveloped dozens of ships, and the gravity vortex began its cycle. Aboard the TSS Defiant, "They're preparing to jump," Captain Michael Grayson reported, his eyes on the touch panel. "Perfect," Admiral Emily Hart replied, her eyes glinting coldly. "Is the Windcatcher agent inside their system?" "Confirmed," Grayson nodded. "It will activate the virus on their hypergate in 30 seconds. "Excellent." She picked up her communications device and pinged the fleet. "Get ready for a show, gentlemen," she said with an ironic smile. Aboard the Empire's flagship, the Darkness of the Empire, K'ra'Zan ordered, "Initiate jump." The hyperdrives began to flicker, distorting space. One by one, the Empire's ships disappeared in bright streams of energy, but suddenly something went wrong. One of the frigates, the Thunder Zal'Kir, flashed with a bright flash and exploded. "What was that?" roared K'ra'Zan. "My lord, there is an anomaly in the hypergate system," shouted Vartan. "Our ships are not just jumping into hyperspace, they are breaking apart into molecules. How is that possible? It seems their virus must have reprogrammed our coordinates." Vartan swallowed his saliva. "Our ships don't enter hyperspace, they accelerate to FTL and simply vaporize." "That's impossible, these savages can't do that." But before K'ra'Zan could finish, another ship, this one the Conquest Shield cruiser, disappeared into the energy stream, exploding like a new star. A deathly silence reigned throughout the wheelhouse. Then a voice came over the speakers, a familiar, mocking voice. "Admiral K'ra'Zan," Emily Hart said, "congratulations on your first and last extended tour of the solar system. We hope you have enjoyed our hospitality." K'ra'Zan felt his eyes darken. "You're a brute." "Oh yes," Hart continued. "And one more thing, don't try to stop the hyperspace gate from activating. We know how you like to grab the controls at the last minute." K'ra'Zan rushed to the control panel and tried to cancel the activation. His fingers flew over the keys as Vartan stood by, pale as a ghost. "There's a chance," the Admiral wheezed, squeezing the emergency deactivation lever. But instead of shutting down, a familiar tune blared from the speakers. "Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down." "Ni! Zaraviv K'ra'Zan, koli spalak energii poglinowście desiatki yogo korabliv." The flagship, the Darkness of the Empire, was thrown back into normal space, but only because its generator failed before it was activated. All the other ships either died in uncontrolled jumps or simply shattered into molecules. Aboard the TSS Defiant, Emily Hart watched the wreckage of the Zal'Kir Armada drift through space like debris after a storm. "How many are left?" she asked. "One ship," Captain Grayson replied. "Their flagship, and that's without engines." "Send them a message," Hart said, hiding her smile. "What kind?" Emily leaned closer to the microphone. "Tell them that our next broadcast is a history lesson for them. The topic, how not to go to war with humanity." As Grayson relayed the message, the Defiant crew burst out laughing. Somewhere in space, the wreckage of the Zal'Kir Empire fleet was orbiting among the cold stars. And in the darkness, among the remains of the burned ships, a lone sound could be heard. Quiet, but inevitable. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. The flagship of the Zal'Kir Empire, the darkness of the Empire, drifted slowly in the cold wasteland of space. Its hull was damaged, and its systems barely maintained basic functions. High Admiral K'ra'Zan stood on the bridge, exhausted, and stunned. "My lord," Lieutenant Vartan said, barely audible. K'ra'Zan was silent. His hands were shaking and his eyes were blank. For the first time in his career, he had no answer. He had lost. He had lost not to strength but to cunning, not to technology but to will. K'ra'Zan began hoarsely. "We will return home and warn them." "Who, my lord?" K'ra'Zan clenched his fists, anger in his voice. "The entire empire. They need to know the truth." His voice trembled. "That humans are not just another weak race. They are a monstrosity that only pretends to be civilized." Aboard the TSS Defiant, Admiral Emily Hart stood on the bridge, watching the image of the battered Zal'Kir flagship barely hanging onto its hull. "So what do we do?" asked Captain Grayson. Emily smiled thoughtfully. "Yes," she said. "Let them go home. And if they try to build a new fleet?" "Oh, they will," Hart replied. "But now their generals and commanders will be afraid of every asteroid, every signal, every shadow in space." She leaned over to the microphone and transmitted one last message to K'ra'Zan's channel. "Welcome to the new reality, Admiral. In it, people are not victims. And if you come to our borders again, we will remind you what fear is." The program ended. Grayson grinned. "They'll think twice about coming here." "And that's the best victory of all," Hart said. "We didn't just survive, we changed the rules." She turned to the observation window and saw Earth, a small but bright dot among the stars. "Try again," she muttered. "I'm waiting for you."